The ocean breeze was salty and warm, carrying the scent of sand sea and the lazy rhythm of a late summer afternoon. Sarah Lawson lowered her sunglasses, her eyes following the deep blue water rippling before her. She had been a lifeguard at Santa Monica Beach for nearly 7 years, long enough to know the sea was never truly gentle, even on the brightest days. Today, the beach was unusually crowded. Laughter, children's shrieks, and the crash of waves blended into a symphony of summer noise. Sarah lazily sipped her lukewarm coffee, ready to end her shift, when her gaze caught on a peculiar scene: a little girl sitting alone, her small feet buried in the sand, dark curls tousled by the wind. The girl wore a pink hoodie far too thick for the 30-degree heat. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, neither happy nor sad, simply waiting. Behind her stood an older woman, tense, clutching her purse tightly. The woman's gaze held both love and fear. "Not them again," Sarah murmured. She'd seen the pair several times that week. They came and went at the same hour, never swimming, only watching the waves. Once she'd heard the woman call the girl Sophia, a soft name that contrasted sharply with the child's solemn expression. Sarah rose, intending to approach them, when the water shifted subtly but wrong. She saw what others didn't: a long, heavy swell forming far offshore. In seconds, her instincts screamed. Sophia stood up, arms outstretched as if reaching for the sea. And in one terrible instant, the waves swallowed her whole. The woman's scream split the air. "Sophia!" Sarah was already running before the sound faded. She tore off her jacket and dove. The water hit her like ice, stealing her breath. She kicked hard, slicing through the current, heart pounding as salt stung her eyes. And then a glimpse of those dark curls beneath the churning surface. She dove deeper, reaching until her fingers brushed the small, limp body. "No, no, no!" Sarah fought her way back, dragging the girl against the raging surf. When her knees hit sand, she coughed, gasped, and began CPR. 1, 2, 3, then a faint rise in the child's chest. A weak cough, a cry, a breath. Sophia was alive. Sarah pulled the trembling girl into her arms, tears and seawater blurring together. Cheers erupted around them, but Sarah could only feel her pulse hammering in her ears. When the medics arrived, Sophia clutched her hand tightly and whispered, "Don't go. Please don't leave me." That fragile voice carved itself into Sarah's heart, deeper than any thank you could. Los Angeles Memorial Hospital buzzed with chaos, yet the small emergency room where Sophia lay felt unnervingly quiet. Sarah stood by the wall, soaked through her lifeguard uniform streaked with salt and sand. She'd just signed the incident report when the atmosphere shifted. A group of men in black suits entered. They said nothing, yet no one dared to stop them. Their eyes swept the room like searchlights. And at their center stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, every step deliberate, and weighted with command. His tailored suit framed a body built for power, dark hair slicked back from sharp cheekbones. But his eyes made Sarah forget to breathe, dark, fathomless, and cold like midnight at sea. "Who are you?" His voice was deep, rough-edged, every syllable carrying an authority that made evasion impossible. "Sarah Lawson. I'm the lifeguard. I saved your daughter." Silence. The man moved closer, each footstep pounding in rhythm with her heart. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words heavy as a vow. Sarah shook her head. "I was doing my job." He tilted his head, studying her. "Your shift ended at 3. It's now 3:20. Her breath caught. "You knew when my shift ended? The person who saved my child didn't act out of duty," he said, voice low. "She worked on instinct. And I trust the instincts of someone willing to dive into death." He turned to leave, but Sophia's small voice broke the air. "Daddy, she promised not to leave me." Sarah froze. The girl's tiny hand still clung to hers. As the murmurs around confirmed the man, Eric Dalton stared for a long moment. Something in his gaze shifted like an unseen current stirring beneath calm waters. Then he spoke a sentence that made Sarah's world tilt. Excuse me, how much will you work for me to protect my daughter?" Sarah blinked. "I don't understand." "Yes, you do," he interrupted, tone indifferent but eyes burning. "A woman who dives into the ocean for a stranger's child is either a fool or someone with a painfully honest heart. I don't hire fools. I need the latter." Sarah's hands trembled, droplets of seawater still trailing down her arms. "You're asking me to be your daughter's bodyguard," he replied, calling it a private protector. Sliding a black business card toward her. $150,000 a year. Housing and full insurance included. Sarah looked down. The card gleamed black with embossed silver letters, Dalton. "Dalton Holdings." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I can't answer right now. You have 24 hours. He brushed a hand over Sophia's hair. "She trusts you. I don't trust anyone else." As he left, Sarah stood frozen, heart pounding. Every instinct told her to walk away, but Sophia's small eyes and pleading, fragile gaze wouldn't let her. Sarah laid the black card on the table that night in her dim, flickering apartment. Eric Dalton, a name that sounded like wind slicing through steel. She opened her laptop and searched. Not much appeared import or heir to Dalton Group, but older buried articles told darker stories of ports disappearances, underground dealings, and shadow ties. She exhaled softly. He's not from my world. Yet the memory of Sophia coughing seawater, whispering, "Don't leave me," refused to fade. Then her phone rang. The nurse's voice from her mother's care home cracked through the static. "Ms. Lawson, your mother's condition worsened. We'll need to switch to a new medication, not covered by insurance estimated cost. About $80,000. The phone slipped from her grasp. Her hands trembled. The silver letters of Eric Dalton shimmered on the table under the light, almost beckoning. Sarah closed her eyes. Inside her head, two sounds clashed: the roar of the ocean, and his deep voice. "I need someone like you." Some choices aren't made out of courage. They're made because destiny leaves no escape. And when Sarah Lawson finally dialed the number on that black card, she stepped into Eric Dalton's world, where love, danger, and truth collided like waves that never rest. If you were Sarah, would you make that call? Share your thoughts below, and stay tuned for part 2, The Dangerous Proposal, where every answer comes with a price paid in heartbeats. Morning in Los Angeles began with a faint light sliding between glass towers, seeping into the small apartment of Sarah Lawson. She sat by the window, a cup of coffee long gone cold in her hands. She hadn't slept all night. Her mind replayed that low, commanding voice of the man who had tilted her entire world in a single afternoon. Eric Dalton. His name echoed in her head like a quiet challenge. She had saved dozens of lives, faced storms, blood, and the kind of death that left silence behind. Yet she had never been pulled into a wave. She couldn't see a wave shaped like a man with eyes as dark and still as the sea before a storm. The phone on the table vibrated. The screen lit up unknown number. Sarah inhaled deeply and answered. "Lawson." The voice on the other end was calm, unmistakable. "I assume you still haven't decided." She glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. "Do you control everything, including when I wake up?" A pause. Then his voice was low and even cool, yet faintly warm like winter air brushing a coastline. "Regarding my daughter's safety, I don't leave things to chance." "Do you have an answer?" Sarah set her cup down. "I'll come, but only to listen. No promises. I'll send a car, no need. I'll get there myself." She hung up before he could reply. Something in his tone made you want to resist and yet obey. She hated that. Dalton Holdings Tower. Downtown LA. The glass doors reached the ceiling, reflecting the cold, flawless morning light, like the man who owned the place. The receptionist bowed slightly as Sarah entered. "Mr. Dalton is expecting you." The elevator carried her to the 50th floor. When the doors opened, a scent of oak and faint cologne filled the air. The room was vast, with walls of glass overlooking the ocean, and in the center of it, Eric Dalton stood with his back to her, a black suit fitting his tall frame perfectly. Light brushed over the line of his shoulders, the edge of his collar, the hand holding a glass of red wine. Without turning, he said, "You're on time. I'm always on time." "Good. I despise tardiness." Sarah stepped closer. "Did you invite me here for an interview or an interrogation?" He turned. Deep, dark, and razor-sharp eyes hit her like a tide. Maybe both. He set the glass down with effortless control. "You saved my daughter's life, and for that I owe you. But I don't believe in luck. I think in terms of capability." "Tell me why you dived in knowing you might die." Sarah met his gaze. "Because I heard someone calling for help, and I knew I couldn't live with myself if I turned away." For a moment, his lips curved not into a smile, but into acknowledgement. "That's the only answer I would have trusted." He moved to the desk, pulled out a folder, and slid it toward her. "Contract, $150,000 a year. Residence in Pacific View. Full health coverage. One task, protect Sophia." Sarah flipped through the pages. Everything was precise clean, except for a single line at the bottom. "Strict compliance with Dalton Holdings confidentiality regulations. Breach will result in consequences as outlined in Clause 12B. What consequences, she asked. He looked at her, steadily unblinking. "You don't want to know." The air thickened between them. Sarah set the folder down, her pulse quickening. "You really know how to inspire trust." "Trust," he said slowly, "is a luxury. But you should understand that. You've seen death in the sea. I see it every day in people's eyes." There was something in the way he said it that didn't belong to the ordinary world. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of man are you, Eric Dalton?" He didn't answer right away. A faint, almost imperceptible smile crossed his lips. His gaze lingered long enough to steal her breath. "I'm the kind of man who never loses what's mine." He stepped back half a pace, voice dropping lower. "Sophia chose you. And when my daughter chooses someone, I don't argue. I only make sure that person never betrays her trust." Sarah exhaled, forcing calm into her voice. "And if I refuse, you won't." You can't be sure. I can. His eyes flicked to the worn leather bag at her side. Sunrise Hospital just issued a notice that they'll stop your mother's treatment in 48 hours if payment isn't made. Sarah froze. You investigated me? No. I don't work with people I don't understand. Each word was cold, yet his eyes carried something that made her unable to despise him. It was as if beneath that ice burned a slow, dangerous flame that could destroy or warm. Sarah clenched her fists. You're buying me with sympathy. No, he replied quietly. I'm giving you a way to live. She couldn't tell whether he meant her mother or herself in that instant. She signed the contract that afternoon. Not for the money, not entirely for Sophia. But something in Eric Dalton's gaze demanded to be understood, even if stepping into his world meant trading safety for uncertainty. A sleek black car waited beneath the building. The driver opened the door. Welcome, Ms. Lawson. Mr. Dalton instructed me to take you to Pacific View. Sarah watched the city fade beyond the window as the car moved along the coastal road. The sun was setting, stretching the shadows of palm trees across the boulevard. The skyline glowed gold and amber beautiful, but tinged with something darker in her chest. The mansion appeared 40 minutes later, nestled against a hillside overlooking the Pacific. White walls, dark roof, a fence of gray wood, and beyond that security cameras and silent guards. A paradise wrapped in steel. The door opened and a familiar voice called out. Miss Sarah Sophia ran to her curls, bouncing sunlight caught in her smile. She wrapped her small arms around Sarah's legs, smelling faintly of soap and sun. Sarah knelt and smiled. How are you feeling? I'm all better. Daddy said you're going to stay with me forever. The innocent words made Sarah pause. Your dad really said that? Yes. Sophia tilted her head, eyes bright. He said you're the angel the sea sent to keep me safe. Sarah looked up and saw him. No suit, no tie, just a white shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms, a few buttons undone to reveal tanned skin, and the faint line of a vein at his throat. The sunset lit his face, sharpening every angle. Their eyes met two tides, colliding mid-ocean, crashing, retreating, leaving echoes behind. This house is yours now, he said, his voice low. The east room faces the ocean. Sophia likes listening to the waves at night. Do you always let your employees live in your home? Never? He paused, lips curving faintly. But you're not just an employee. Sarah half smiled, half guarded. You always say things that make people unsure whether to fear you or trust you. Both would be wise. She opened her mouth to respond, but he leaned closer enough that his breath brushed her ear. Welcome to my world, Sarah Lawson. When she turned, he was already walking away, one hand resting on Sophia's shoulder. They disappeared down the glowing hallway, a man and a child, two silhouettes fading into the dying light. Sarah remained at the doorway, the wind from the sea lifting her hair, carrying the sound of waves breaking against stone, a warning, or perhaps a promise. She had once dived into the ocean to save a life. This time she had stepped into another kind of ocean, without water, but deeper, darker, and far more complex to escape. And somewhere in its depths, a pair of midnight eyes awaited her. The first morning at Pacific View unfolded beneath a pale veil of sunlight that slipped across the olive trees lining the drive. The wind from the ocean carried the scent of salt through the wide window, brushing gently against Sarah's shoulder, like the greeting of a world that was not yet hers. She sat up the silk sheets, sliding coolly against her skin. The room was so vast that even the sound of her own breathing felt misplaced. Everything here was perfect to the point of disbelief. Curtains soft as mist, polished wooden floors, gleaming under light, and an eastern wall that opened entirely to the sea. Sarah stepped out onto the balcony. The morning breeze lifted her hair. Below stretched a manicured garden of roses, lavender, and stone paths that looked washed in sunlight. Farther uphill stood the primary Dalton residence, solemn, grand, and isolated like a fortress. She recalled what he had told her the night before. Pacific View isn't just a house. It's the only place I trust to be safe. At the time, she thought he was exaggerating. But now, surrounded by invisible precision, she understood this wasn't a home. It was territory guarded and controlled down to every breath. A gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. Ms. Lawson, breakfast is ready. Mr. Dalton asked me to invite you downstairs. Sarah turned to see a kind-faced, middle-aged woman in a cream uniform smiling warmly. Carmen, right? Yes, ma'am. I'm the housekeeper. You can call me Carmen. Thank you, Sarah replied softly. Is Sophia awake? Carmen's smile deepened. She's been up since dawn waiting for you. She hasn't stopped asking, is Miss Sarah awake yet? A slight warmth spread through Sarah's chest, rare and fragile, like sunlight touching water. The dining room of the main villa was bathed in natural light. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened to a terrace overlooking the sea, where waves shimmered silver under the early sun. Sophia sat at the table, a glass of milk in her hands. Her face lit up as soon as she saw Sarah. You're here, Sarah smiled. You're up so early. Daddy said if I wake up early, I can hear the dolphins calling the sun. Sarah laughed. Dolphins don't call the sun Sophia. Daddy says they do. Don't you believe him? Then your dad knows better than I do. Sophia giggled a sound like wind chimes, and for a fleeting moment, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected in this house ease. But her smile faded when she heard footsteps behind her. Eric Dalton entered. No suit, no tie, just dark trousers, a white shirt sleeves rolled, and top buttons undone. The light from the windows framed him in a halo that felt real and dangerous. He said nothing at first, pulled out a chair, and sat across from her. The simple act quieted the room. Good morning, he said, his voice low and deliberate. Morning, she replied softly. Did you sleep well? Well enough, though the room's so big I thought I'd gotten lost in a museum. A faint curve touched his lips. Then I'll have them add a creaky chair, a few faded paintings, and the smell of burnt coffee to make you feel at home. Sarah flushed, unsure if he was teasing or sincere, but Sophia saved her from answering. Daddy, can we go to the beach today? Miss Sarah will come too, right? Eric looked at his daughter, his expression softening instantly. Yes, but only within the guarded zone. Miss Lawson decides how far you can go, understood? Yes, sir, Sophia beamed, turning to Sarah. Come on, Miss Sarah. The Dalton private beach lay below the cliffs, cut off from the world by steel fencing and hidden cameras. The waves were gentler here, yet they carried the deep breathing of the open sea. Sophia ran ahead, leaving small footprints in the pale sand. Sarah followed close behind her eyes, never leaving the child. Each step brought back the image of that day in Santa Monica, the wave, the scream, the desperate dive. When Sophia bent to pick up a seashell, Sarah suddenly felt a gaze on her. She looked up. Far above on the cliff overlooking the shore stood Eric. Even at a distance, she could make out his tall, composed, unmoving stance, like a statue that breathed. He didn't hide the way he watched her. And when the wind lifted her hair, that gaze seemed to deepen, pulling her in layer by layer. Sarah turned away, willing her heart to steady, but it refused to listen. By noon, she returned to the house. Carmen was tidying the kitchen and smiled as Sarah entered. Miss Sophia is napping, and Mr. Dalton is in his study upstairs. Sarah nodded and started up the staircase. A closed wooden door to his office stood at the end of the long corridor. She hesitated. Something curious or instinct kept her feet still. Just as she turned to leave, his voice carried through the heavy wood. Not the tone he used with her was sharper edged. I warned you, Marco. Please don't forget my shipment from Long Beach. A rough, uneasy voice answered. I didn't, Eric. Maybe the Russians. The sound of a fist slamming the desk made her flinch. Don't mention them in my house. If anyone moves 1 inch closer, I'll make him disappear from the map. The silence that followed was thick as smoke. Sarah took an involuntary step back, her pulse racing. She didn't understand every word, but the cold, commanding, and lethal tone told her enough this was not business as usual. The door swung open. Eric stood there, his eyes so cold her skin prickled. What did you hear? Nothing. I was passing by. He studied her long enough for her to feel exposed to the core. Then suddenly his tone softened. Good. Stay out of things that aren't yours to know. Sarah swallowed hard. If those things could endanger Sophia, I don't have the right to ignore them. His brow lifted. You'd challenge me only if you ever become a danger. His eyes lingered not with disdain or curiosity for the first time, but something new and intriguing. You're the first person to say that to me. Maybe others are afraid of you. He let out a low, tired laugh. They have reason to be. She turned to leave, but his voice came again quieter, almost weary. Sarah, what kind of man do you think I am? There was no easy answer. She looked at him with those dark eyes, a mirror and a wound. I think you're a man who doesn't believe in kindness, but wants it more than anyone else. For a heartbeat, his expression faltered. Then he looked away, voice roughened by something unspoken. Desire can be the most dangerous thing. She said nothing. But as the door closed behind her, Sarah knew she had touched something few dared to touch, the armor around his soul. That night, the ocean wind howled through Pacific View. Sophia slept soundly in her bed, while Sarah sat on the balcony of the second floor, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. Far out at sea, cargo ships blinked like wandering stars. She could hear the waves, the wind, and the measured echo of Eric's footsteps somewhere inside the great house. She didn't yet know what lay ahead, a job, a test, or something far more irreversible. But as the wind carried the soft laughter of a child dreaming, Sarah realized she was no longer an outsider. She was becoming part of his world, the world of Eric Dalton, where every breath concealed a secret. And when his shadow crossed the dimly lit hallway, tall against the golden glow, she knew whether she wanted it or not, her heart had already begun to follow the rhythm of his steps. Night at Pacific View was unlike anywhere else. It wasn't the gentle calm of a seaside town. It was a silence so absolute that it felt alive. A silence built not of peace, but of power and secrets. The ocean wind swept fiercely through the olive trees, carrying salt dampness and the faint metallic scent of the restless sea. Sarah lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, unable to sleep. She was used to the sound of waves, but not this kind of silence. The kind so heavy, she could hear the clocks ticking, echoing inside her chest. Somewhere below, in the lower levels of the house, a flicker of light pulsed through a crack beneath a door. For the first time, she realized the mansion had more than its main floors. It had a basement that no one ever mentioned. She threw on a robe and stepped into the hallway. Cold air brushed over her shoulders. The corridor stretched endlessly lined with gray carpets and soft amber sconces illuminating old paintings. Everything was beautiful. Perfect. And yet the more perfect it looked, the more unreal it felt. As she passed Eric's office light streamed from under the door, she hesitated. Part of her wanted to keep walking, but another part, the part that worried for Sophia, took a step forward. The door wasn't locked. Sarah pushed gently. The air inside was thick with cigarette smoke and whiskey. The desk lamp cast half of Eric's face in light, the other in shadow. He stood sleeves rolled, holding a photograph of Sophia as a toddler. And on the floor before him, a man knelt wrists bound with plastic ties, mouth taped shut. Blood dripped from the corner of his lips, staining the marble like spilled ink. Sarah froze. Eric didn't look at her. His voice was low, calm, too calm. "You betrayed me. I trusted you with the Long Beach docks, and you let them take what was mine." The man groaned through the tape, eyes wide with terror. "Don't speak," Eric said, his tone colder than steel. "I don't need excuses. I need loyalty." He reached for the gun on the desk, slowly, almost gently. Sarah's heartbeat thundered. Her throat went dry. She stepped back, and the old wooden floor let out a faint creak. It was enough. Eric turned sharply. His eyes were dark, bottomless, and locked onto hers. No surprise, no anger, only silence. Then quietly, "Get out." Sarah stood still. "Eric, what are you out?" He didn't raise his voice, but the air between them froze. She backed away, closing the door behind her. Her hands trembled as she turned to leave. And when the gunshot rang out, deep, short finale, her knees nearly gave way. She stumbled back to her room, slammed the door shut, and pressed both hands to her mouth. The echo of that sound kept replaying in her mind, not just as a gunshot, but as a sentence. The next morning, the Dalton estate was disturbingly peaceful. Sophia laughed as she ran through the grass. Carmen arranged flowers in the glass vase. Everyone moved as if the night before had never happened. Sarah sat in the garden sunlight filtering through the leaves, warming her trembling hands. Eric approached. There was no trace of the man she'd seen in the dark. White shirt, coffee in hand, calm eyes, controlled expression. "You're up early," he said, his voice even as if this were any ordinary morning. "So are you," Sarah replied, her gaze fixed on the cup he held. Silence lingered, broken only by the sound of distant waves. Finally, she spoke. "I heard a gunshot last night." He placed the cup down, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I know. You killed someone. He betrayed me." Sarah's voice hardened. "Sophia lives in this house where you fired a gun. Is this how you protect her? By surrounding her with blood?" For the first time, his eyes darkened, not with anger, but with pain. "You don't understand. Then make me understand." He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, like wind gliding across water. "I promised the woman I loved that I'd protect Sophia at any cost, even if the price were my soul." Sarah inhaled sharply. "Her mother. She died because of me." Each word fell heavy as stone. 6 years ago, a car attack meant for me, but she was the one in the driver's seat. No tears, no drama, just the quiet, brutal honesty of loss. It made Sarah shiver. That's why he continued, "I don't let anyone near my daughter except you." Sarah's breath caught. "You trust me that much?" "No," a faint, bitter smile. "I trust my daughter's eyes." He rose, straightened his cuff, and said evenly, "If you think I'm a killer, I won't deny it. But remember this, I've never killed anyone who didn't earn it." He left her in the sunlight, confused, torn, and shaken. She wanted to hate him. She truly did. But the look in his eyes when he spoke of his wife carried too much grief guilt and the quiet despair of a man who had already lost everything. That afternoon, Sophia asked to paint on the terrace. She placed a sheet of paper on the table, crayon in hand, and drew 3 figures standing by the sea. Sarah smiled. "Who's that?" "That's me, you and Daddy." Sarah touched her shoulder gently. "What about your mom?" The little girl fell silent. After a while, she whispered, "Mommy doesn't like the sea anymore." Sarah froze. The child's words were simple, small, yet unbearably sad, lodged in her chest. She looked up toward the main house, where Eric stood by the balcony, staring toward the horizon. In that instant, she understood both father and daughter carried the same wound, a loss that time refused to heal. Night came again. Sarah couldn't sleep. She stepped out to the balcony, the wind lifting her hair as the dark sea stretched below. Moonlight shattered on the waves like broken glass. A soft sound came from behind her. "You should sleep," Eric's voice murmured. He stood at the doorway, shirt, half-unbuttoned hair, slightly tousled eyes, tired yet impossibly sharp. "I can't," she said. "Because of last night, because of everything." He moved closer, each step deliberate. "You know, Sarah, you have a dangerous habit. What habit? You want to save everyone. But sometimes, people don't want to be saved." She turned toward him. "And you? Do you want to be saved?" He gave a small, sorrowful smile, the saddest she had ever seen. "I drowned a long time ago. The sea you jumped into that day is nothing compared to the one I live in." The wind carried the scent of salt and whiskey between them. And in that fleeting moment, as she met his gaze, Sarah saw it behind the cold facade, a man so lonely it hurt to breathe. Without thinking, her hand brushed his. Just a light touch, instinctive human. He didn't pull away. He only looked at her long and silent eyes, reflecting everything he could never say. Two broken souls standing side by side in the dark, one who had forgotten how to trust, and one who still believed despite every scar. When he finally walked away, Sarah remained there, heart-pounding. She didn't know what awaited her love danger, or both. Only that something invisible had formed between them from this moment on, fragile, yet unbreakable. And in the deepest shadows of the Dalton mansion, the most terrifying thing was no longer the echo of a gunshot. It was the warmth, quietly finding its way into her heart. The morning after the storm, the Los Angeles sky shimmered in shades of silver gray like a cold mirror. Sarah sat in the back seat beside Sophia as the black SUV rolled quietly through tree-lined streets. Marcus, a reserved driver who never removed his dark glasses, listened silently to his earpiece eyes fixed on the road. Sophia hummed "You Are My Sunshine," her clear little voice filling the car. Sarah gazed out the window, skyscrapers gleaming and fading behind them, yet something inside her felt uneasy, a calm that was far too still. Since moving into Pacific View, she'd never been far from Eric's watchful reach. He never said it outright, but Sarah knew every step she took was monitored. But this morning, Eric was away at a meeting at Long Beach Harbor, and for the first time she felt something close to freedom. That freedom lasted less than 10 minutes. A white van shot out from a side street at the turn near St. Helena Academy. Marcus slammed the brakes. Sophia screamed, her backpack tumbling to the floor. The tires screeched violently. Sarah turned sharply, the van doors burst open, and 3 men in work uniforms jumped out, faces masked. "Hold on," Marcus shouted. Sarah yanked Sophia down to the floor, her heart pounding, but her movement steady, trained, precise, and fearless. Glass shattered. A hand reached in through the broken window. Sarah grabbed the pepper spray from the seat pocket and fired. A man's scream split the air. Marcus floored the accelerator, the SUV lunging forward, tires shrieking, leaving a trail of white smoke behind. Sophia sobbed, clinging to Sarah's arm. "It's okay," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling, but her eyes hard as steel. "You're safe now." The Dalton estate turned into a war zone after the attack. Eric arrived just 15 minutes after the call. He said nothing as he strode through the door, his suit dusted with grit, his eyes sharp enough to cut through stone. "Anyone hurt?" Marcus shook his head. "No, sir, but they were armed." Eric's jaw tightened. "License plate fake." He didn't respond. His gaze shifted to Sarah. Something in his eyes made her shiver, not anger, but fear, carefully hidden beneath control. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but he didn't believe her. He stepped closer, his hand resting on her shoulder. Firm, steady feeling, the faint tremor under her shirt. "Never leave this house with Sophia again unless I'm with you." Sarah met his eyes. "If I hadn't left, Sophia wouldn't be alive right now." He froze. They stared at each other, no words, just the quiet, undeniable understanding that both were right. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She went downstairs for water, but as she passed the west corridor, voices drifted from Eric's office. "Someone on the inside. We've been compromised." Marcus's voice is low and tense. Eric replied, calm as steel. "I know, but I don't know who yet. It could be one of the security team. Or don't say or, I don't want guesses. Only proof." Sarah's pulse quickened. Someone inside. The words echoed in her mind like thunder before a storm. She turned to leave, but his voice came from behind her before she could take another step. "How much did you hear, Sarah?" She spun around. Eric stood in the hall's shadows. Tall, composed, a living silhouette. His tone wasn't angry. It was calm. Too calm. Not much, she admitted quietly. Just enough to know someone's betrayed you. "Are you afraid?" "No. I'm worried for Sophia." For a moment, something softened in his eyes. He took a slow step forward, stopping just half a breath away. "I told you no one will ever touch her. Are you sure?" Because today, if it weren't for me, her words stopped as his hand tilted her chin upward, forcing her to meet his gaze. You always like challenging me. She held her ground. I only speak the truth, and that he murmured, voice rough and low, makes me want to keep you close and run from you simultaneously. His tone was raw, weary, too honest, and it left her heart unsteady. The next morning, Eric left early. Sophia was still shaken, so Sarah spent the morning with her in the garden. The sea breeze stirred the flowers, and the little girl pressed closer. Sophia asked Miss Sarah softly, if I fall into the water again, will you save me? Sarah smiled gently. Always. Daddy says you're the strongest person in the world. Your dad exaggerates. No, he doesn't. He says you're different. You're not afraid of anything. Sarah paused. Something tender and painful stirred inside her. If only Sophia knew how many nights she'd trembled in the dark because of her father's silence. Would the child still believe she was brave? That night, the storm returned. Rain hammered the glass like fists. After tucking Sophia into bed, Sarah heard hurried footsteps in the hall. She opened her door just as Marcus whispered to another guard. Lock down the east wing. The security feed's been tampered with. Sarah's blood ran cold. Tampered with, Marcus nodded grimly. We're handling it. Please stay in your room. But instinct told her that staying put was the real danger. She crept down the staircase following the faint sound from the control room. Inside, under the flicker of screens, a young guard, Dean, was hunched over the console holding a small USB drive. Dean, she called. He jerked around, eyes wide, hand frozen mid-motion. In that second, panic flashed across his face, and he reached for his gun. Sarah lunged forward. The shot fired upward, sparks raining from the ceiling. She twisted his wrist fast and efficiently, the move of someone trained to survive. The gun clattered to the floor. Dean struggled to run, but footsteps thundered behind him. Eric appeared in the doorway. Without a word, he picked up the gun and leveled it. Dean trembled. I didn't have a choice. They took my sister? Eric's voice cut through, low and final. You made the wrong choice. The gunshot was clean, swift, deadly. Dean collapsed, eyes wide with disbelief. Sarah froze. It had all happened too fast. Blood spread across the marble floor, glinting beneath the harsh light reflecting Eric's cold expression. He looked at her. Are you afraid of me yet? She didn't answer. Her eyes met his, filled with anger, sorrow, and something too complicated to name. You didn't have to kill him. He put Sophia in their sights. I don't hesitate with men like that. But you're teaching your daughter that killing is the only way to survive. For the first time, he faltered. Just slightly, but enough for her to see it. Sarah stepped closer, her voice softening. You can be as strong as you want, Eric. But your daughter doesn't need a god. She needs a father who can still feel. The air between them thickened, charged, and heavy. He stared at her for a long moment. Then suddenly he reached out and pulled her to him. The embrace was fierce, desperate, trembling with everything he couldn't say. Don't try to understand me, Sarah, he whispered against her ear. The more you do, the harder it'll be to leave. She stood still, feeling his heartbeat racing beneath the fabric of his shirt. And in that storm-soaked night between the scent of blood gunpowder and rain, Sarah realized one thing for sure. She was stepping deeper into the storm, and that was Eric Dalton, and there might be no way back. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. Heavy drops slid down the glass windows of the Dalton mansion, reflecting the dim golden light of the living room. The air was thick, damp, heavy with the scent of whiskey and cigarette smoke. Sarah sat quietly on the couch, Sophia's sketchbook in her hands. The girl had drawn a new picture, 3 figures standing in the middle of a dark sea. Silver waves curling around their feet, and above them, a half-hidden moon. Like their storylight and darkness intertwined, neither willing to surrender. Eric entered the room. His shirt was still wet, rainwater tracing a line from his neck to his jaw. He said nothing, only set his gun on the table and poured himself a drink. You're still awake? He asked, his voice rough after a long day. Couldn't sleep, Sarah replied, eyes still fixed on the drawing. Sophia had a nightmare. She said someone was standing outside her window. Eric froze, his expression shifting instantly. Who? I don't know. Maybe it was nothing, a shadow the rain. But she was terrified. He turned sharply, his voice dropping low. From now on, you'll sleep in her room. I'll increase security. Sarah set the sketchbook down. Eric, what's going on? Why are people constantly coming for you? He looked at her, eyes dark as stormwater. You don't want to know. But I need to, she insisted to Sophia. A long silence passed. Then he stepped away from the table, walking toward her slowly. The distance between them shrank until she could feel the tension in the air, heavy and magnetic. Sarah, he said, voice husky, sometimes the less you know, the longer you live. She didn't back away. And sometimes silence kills you from the inside. Something flickered in his eyes. A drop of rain fell from his hair to the wooden floor, small, but the sound echoed through the room. Then suddenly Eric leaned down, No warning, no prelude, just a kiss. Deep, desperate, weighted with everything unspoken. Fear, longing, loneliness, the kind that lived in both their veins. Sarah froze for a heartbeat, then gave in, caught in the pull of a tide neither could resist. Their breath mingled warm trembling, tasting faintly of rain and salt. When he pulled away, his eyes still held hers. "I told you," he murmured, "the more you understand me, the harder it is to leave." Sarah's lips parted in a trembling smile. "Maybe I was never trying to leave." For a moment, time stopped. The storm outside seemed to fade. Then the phone rang sharply, slicing through the quiet. Eric turned, answering it with a cold edge to his voice. "Report. He's dead. No, I don't believe in coincidence. Cancel all shipments tomorrow." He hung up and turned back to her. "You need to take Sophia and leave, now." Sarah frowned. "What's happening?" he said. "Someone wants to see me fall," his tone low and bitter. "And they'll start with the only person I love." She froze. For the first time, real human fear trembled in his voice. It was 2 a.m. The Dalton mansion was ablaze with light. Security teams filled the halls. Sarah sat on the bed, Sophia asleep in her arms, her mind swirling with dread. She wanted to believe they were safe, but her instincts told her otherwise. The door opened softly. Eric stepped in, gun in hand, coat discarded. "You're still awake. I can't sleep when you keep pacing like a ghost." He sat beside the bed. Sophia slept peacefully, her small face serene, unaware of the storm surrounding her. Eric reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. His expression softened, almost breaking. "She looks like her mother," he whispered. "Even the way she sleeps." Sarah said nothing. In the dim light, she saw him differently, not the ruthless Dalton magnate, but a man quietly bleeding beneath invisible scars. "Eric," she began softly, "you don't have to carry everything alone." He looked up, their eyes meeting. "You don't understand. Everyone who gets close to me disappears. Maybe that's because you never let anyone stay." He went still. Her words were gentle, but they cut through him like a blade through glass. "You don't know what I've done," he said finally. "Everything I touch turns to ash." Sarah slowly reached out her hand, covering his. "But Sophia's still here. And so am I." Something broke in his gaze for the first time, a tremor of hope struggling beneath the weight of his darkness. Morning came gray and heavy. Sarah woke on the couch, not remembering when she'd fallen asleep. She saw Eric outside the terrace, through the window, speaking into his phone. "I know who it is. Don't touch him until I say so." His voice was ice, his posture rigid. She couldn't make out the words, but dread rose in her chest like a tide. When he turned back inside the early light, hit his face, weary, haunted, resolute. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I need you to take Sophia out of the city for a few days. You want us to run? No. I want you to live." The words hit her like a wound. She stepped closer, searching his eyes. "And what about you?" He gave a faint, sorrowful smile. "I'm the one they're after." "I don't run." Sarah gripped his hand tightly. "If you die, Sophia will never forgive this world." His voice dropped rough and low. "And you... will you forgive me if I kill again to protect you both?" She looked at him for a long time before whispering, "No. But I'll understand." His eyes closed briefly, and then he pulled her into another kiss. This one wasn't passion. It was farewell. Slow aching filled with the knowledge that it might be the last. When he broke away, his voice cracked slightly. "Promise me. If anything happens, take Sophia and don't return." "Eric, don't argue." His gaze burned fierce, unyielding. "This is the life I chose. But you deserve peace." He turned away, walking down the stone steps. The wind caught his coat, sunlight breaking through clouds like fire over his shoulders. Sarah watched him go, tears falling soundlessly, not even knowing why. By noon, the sky turned dark again. An explosion shook the eastern wing of the estate. The ground trembled. The alarms wailed sharply, endlessly. Sarah grabbed Sophia and ran into the corridor. Smoke poured from the security block. Through the chaos, she saw Eric running toward the flames. The fire's glow blazing against his face, fierce, relentless, fearless. Sophia screamed his name, reaching for him. Sarah held her tight heart pounding with terror. In that instant, she understood there is no curse more devastating than loving a man who lives on the edge of life and death. Because with Eric Dalton, love would always come wrapped in blood, and anyone who loved him had to learn how to survive the storm he carried inside. Thick smoke engulfed the eastern wing of the Dalton estate. The stench of fuel and burning metal filled the air, mingling with shouts and the crackle of flames. Chaos conducted to the rhythm of fear. Sarah clutched Sophia tightly against her chest, crouching low as she ran through the corridor, dodging falling shards of glass raining from the shattered ceiling. Miss Sarah Marcus shouted from the far end of the hall, his face streaked with sweat and soot gun in hand. "The car's ready. We need to go now." "What about Eric?" Sarah screamed back, her voice breaking. He's still in the security wing. We've lost contact. The words struck like a blade. Her chest ached with every beat of her heart. Before she could respond, Sophia's small hand clutched her shirt, trembling. Where's Daddy? Sarah knelt, her hand shaking from the heat and the smoke. He's coming, sweetheart. I promise. A promise she knew she might never be able to keep. Outside, rain began to fall again, hard. Furious, as if the heavens shared their fury, Marcus threw the car door open, motioning for her to enter, but Sarah shook her head. I'm not leaving without him. Sarah Marcus's voice cracked with desperation. If you die, who's going to protect the girl? The words cut straight through her reason. She looked at Sophia, trembling in the back seat, tears streaming down her small, soot-streaked cheeks. Then Sarah turned to Marcus, and her decision was already made. Keep her safe. I'll be back. Before he could stop her, she ran back into the burning house. The smoke was blinding. Sarah wrapped her sleeve across her mouth, each breath searing her lungs. She moved on instinct toward the security wing, toward him. And then she saw him, tall and unwavering, amidst the flames, dragging a wounded guard through the collapsing corridor. His shoulder bled, but his eyes were still steady, cold, alive. Eric, she shouted. He turned, stunned for an instant, squinting through the haze. I told you to get out! I'm not leaving you! A second explosion roared. The wall split open, debris raining down. Sarah lunged forward, pushing him aside. They hit the floor hard, the world collapsing in fire and dust. For a heartbeat, they just lay there, his arms around her, shielding her body with his own. Their breaths collided, tasting of smoke and survival. You're insane, he rasped. So are you, she shot back between gasps. We're even. A laugh, low incredulous, escaped his throat. Then he pulled her up. Come on, no more heroics. We're out of time. They burst through the back exit just as the main corridor collapsed. The rain lashed down, hissing as it met the fire. Sarah turned, watching the mansion's glass dome cave in flames, reflecting red across Eric's face. He stared at the inferno, not just a home burning, but a lifetime. Years, he murmured, voice hollow. Everything I built, and now it's just ashes. Sarah placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Not everything. You still have Sophia, and yourself. His gaze met hers, dark, searching, raw. Then softly. And you. That night, they took refuge in a small coastal cottage on the edge of the old Dalton property. The place was worn, humble, but quiet. Sophia slept on the sofa, her little fingers still curled around her stuffed bunny. Sarah sat by the window, staring at the vast black sea. The wind carried the scent of salt and the faint trace of smoke still clinging to their clothes. Eric appeared beside her. His shirt changed, though blood still seeped through the bandage on his shoulder. Let me see that wound, Sarah said, not turning. He gave a small, tired smile. Since when did you start treating injuries? Since I started taking care of stubborn men like you. She fetched the first aid kit and knelt in front of him. When the fabric slid off his shoulder, the wound was deeper than she'd thought, angry red and raw. She dabbed it gently with alcohol, her hand trembling slightly. Does it hurt? Not as much as watching you cry? Her head snapped up. I wasn't crying. You were, he said quietly, when the smoke reached the stairs. I saw you. Sarah tightened the bandage, maybe harder than necessary. He winced, but said nothing. When people fear losing someone, he said, after a pause, voice low and almost confessional, they don't realize what it means they're in love. Her breath caught. And who are you afraid of losing, Eric? His eyes found hers, steady, unflinching. You. The word was simple, but it landed in her chest like a spark on dry ground. She wanted to deny and push it away, yet part of her didn't want to. Eric, she whispered, I can't be part of your world. I can't live surrounded by blood and shadows. He tilted his head, the faintest, saddest smile playing on his lips. I know, but I don't want you in that world. I want you in my life. Her gaze dropped. I don't know how long I can trust you. Long enough, he murmured, for me to change. Outside, the sea crashed against the cliffs, the rhythm echoing like a heartbeat. Inside, Sarah finished wrapping the last of the bandage. She started to rise, but Eric caught her wrist. Stay. She looked up. The warm light flickered across his face, softening the hard lines, blending light and shadow into something human. He no longer looked like a ruthless magnate, just a man trying for once to believe in something fragile. Sarah didn't answer. She sat back down beside him. After a long silence, he spoke. When my wife was alive, he said quietly, she used to tell me, Eric, you can buy the whole world, but you'll never buy peace. I laughed back then. I thought she was just being poetic. But now I understand. Peace only comes when someone's brave enough to sit beside you in the ruins. Sarah lifted her gaze to him. And you think I'm that person? He smiled faintly. You're the first one who didn't run. The distance between them shrank. Neither moved intentionally, but neither pulled away. The sea wind drifted through the window, extinguishing the lone candle. Only moonlight remained pale, silvery tender. His breath brushed her lips warm and salt-touched. And then another kiss. Slow, unhurried, not wild, not hungry, just the quiet ache of two souls who had both walked through fire. A kiss that felt less like passion and more like survival. When it ended, Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "If you keep going down this road, Sophia will lose you. And I'll lose both of you." He looked at her for a long moment, his voice rough when he finally spoke. "Then help me find another road." Sarah took his trembling hand, feeling the warmth pulse beneath her fingers. "I'll try," she whispered. "But you have to let me stay, not just as Sophia's protector, but as someone who can pull you back into the light." Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky began to pale at the horizon. The sea softened its rhythm gentler, like the world exhaling after the storm. Sarah realized something inside the small cottage amid the scent of salt and smoke. Even if everything around them had burned to the ground, one thing remained: the fragile, trembling faith between two people who once believed their hearts had stopped beating. And that fragile faith might be the only thing strong enough to save them from the darkness and themselves. Morning broke softly over the sea. Mist drifted across the horizon, veiling the water in a thin silver haze. The first sunrise, after days of rain, painted the waves in shades of pale rose. Sarah stepped onto the porch, wrapped a wool shawl around her shoulders, and breathed deeply. The air carried the scent of salt ash, and something new, fragile, like the beginning of another life. Inside, Sophia was still asleep, her breathing steady and light as the rhythm of the tide. Eric stood near the fireplace, a cup of coffee in his hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. He looked calm, but Sarah could see the exhaustion behind that calm, sleepless nights. Calls in the dark, the faces of those he'd lost. All of it lingered quietly in his gaze. "You didn't sleep?" she asked softly, careful not to wake Sophia. He shook his head. "I couldn't. I keep thinking about all the things that could have been different." Sarah moved closer. "Different how?" He was silent for a few seconds before answering, his voice low. "Sophia may have had a normal childhood if I hadn't chosen this path. I wouldn't have turned everyone around me into targets." The early light touched his face, handsome, hardened, yet worn by grief. "You can't change the past, Eric," she said gently. "But you can do differently now." He turned toward her, eyes torn between hope and disbelief. "Can a man like me start over?" "Some people don't need to be perfect," Sarah replied softly. "They need to know when to stop." Her words cut through him like a quiet blade. He smiled faintly, a sad, helpless smile. "Sarah," he said after a pause, "if I walked away from all of this, would you come with me?" She froze. "You mean that?" "I do. I have enough money for a lifetime, but no desire to keep fighting. I want to live differently. With you, with Sophia." Her heart pounded too fast, too loud. She'd once wished he would say something like this, yet now that he had it terrified her. "You think they'll let you walk away?" "No," he said quietly, "but I'm willing to pay the price." By noon, the sky had cleared. Sophia woke up beaming at the sunlight streaming through the window. She ran outside, collecting seashells still wet with dew. Sarah followed her, smiling at the simple joy of it. From a distance, Eric watched them, mother and child, in everything but name. The sight softened something inside him. For the first time in years, he felt the warmth of peace. But peace never lasted long in his world. Marcus drove up, his expression tight. He stepped out and handed Eric a sealed folder. "They've found you, sir. A group is on the move. And I don't think it's just one." Eric closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "I thought we had more time." "We don't," Marcus said grimly. "They know Sophia's alive." Sarah heard it, and her body went cold. "Why would they care about Sophia?" Marcus hesitated, glancing at Eric. It was Eric who finally spoke. "They don't want her. They want me to surrender. Sophia is just leverage." Sarah clenched her fists. "Then we leave, now." Eric shook his head. "You and Sophia go. I stay." She spun toward him. "No, you promised me you'd walk away. You can't let that promise burn in just one night." He stepped closer, his hand rising to her cheek. "I can't let them near you. If I go with you, they'll find you. But if I stay, they'll believe you've disappeared for good." "Eric!" Her voice broke, trembling. He pressed his lips gently to her forehead, a long, silent, aching kiss that tasted like farewell. "Don't come back," he whispered. "Ever." That afternoon, Sarah and Sophia sat in the back of the car. Marcus drove fast along the winding coastal road. Sarah looked back at the small house fading behind them in the mist at every turn. Sophia leaned against her shoulder, her small voice barely audible. "Miss Sarah? Is Daddy coming with us?" Sarah forced a smile, her throat tight. "He'll come later when it's safe." But inside she knew some men were born to walk alone because they didn't know how to keep peace, only how to protect it with blood. That night, the sky burned red. In the distance, the roar of helicopters mixed with the deep, rolling thunder of explosions from the coast. Sarah held Sophia close, tears spilling down her face before she realized they were falling. "Where's Daddy?" the little girl whispered. She murmured Daddy's, stopping the storm, her voice shaking like the wind itself. Outside, the sea raged, reflecting flashes of red fire from the horizon. She didn't know if he was still alive, only that something inside her had shattered beyond repair. 3 days later, local news reported a suspected explosion linked to the Los Angeles coastline corporate conflict. No remains were recovered. Eric Dalton was presumed dead. Sarah refused to believe it. Something deep inside her refused. She moved north to a quiet Oregon town near the sea, where Sophia could begin again. Each morning, Sarah made coffee and opened the window to the ocean breeze, as though waiting for someone who might return at any moment. She still kept the silver lighter he'd once given her engraved with faint words, "The light always finds its way." And somehow she believed it. 1 year later, a spring morning, the sea shimmered bright beneath a pale sun. Sophia came running up from the shore, a small envelope in her hands. "Miss Sarah, someone left this at the door." Sarah opened it. Inside was a single photograph of her and Sophia on the beach, captured from afar. On the back, a handwritten message, simple, strong, heartbreakingly familiar. "I promised I'd live. And I've kept my word." Her fingers trembled around the photo. A smile broke through her tears. Outside, the sun rose higher, scattering golden light across the waves. The wind brushed against the doorframe, carrying the soft rhythm of the sea, the sound of return, the echo of hope that never dies. Wherever he was, no matter how dark the world remained, Sarah knew one thing for sure. Love doesn't disappear. It becomes light, and it always finds its way back home. Morning in Oregon was still wrapped in mist. The waves rolled gently against the shore, steady soft, like the breathing of someone lost in a dream. Sarah sat on the wooden porch, steam rising from the cup of tea beside her. In her hand was the photograph with an unmarked envelope and the simple line, "I promised I'd live." A year that had felt like a lifetime. She had learned how to smile again. How do you teach Sophia her letters, cook and plant flowers in the garden? She taught the little girl that the world was still good, that peace wasn't an illusion. But sometimes on stormy nights, when thunder rolled far away, Sarah would startle awake, certain she'd heard that deep, familiar voice calling her name. The door creaked open. Sophia patted out her hair messy, cradling a small white cat. "Miss Sarah." "I dreamed about Daddy," she said softly. "He was standing on the pier smiling at me." Sarah smiled and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Maybe he misses you." "I don't think he's dead," Sophia said firmly, eyes bright through the fog. "Daddy never breaks a promise." The simplicity of her words struck something profound in Sarah, a pain and a warmth all at once. That afternoon, the rain returned light, steady, persistent. Sarah was tending the garden when a small delivery truck stopped at the gate. The postman, raincoat dripping, handed her a sealed envelope. "From Los Angeles," he said. "No sender." Sarah tore it open. Inside wasn't a letter, but a plane ticket, first-class destination Los Angeles. Beneath it was a single handwritten note. "If you still believe in me, come to where it all began." No name, but she didn't need one. One line was enough. 2 days later, Sarah landed in Los Angeles. The city shimmered beneath the sunset glass towers, brushing the skylights glimmering off wet streets. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same, familiar and foreign at once. She went to Donatello's, the Italian restaurant, where everything had started, where a shattered plate had changed her life forever. It was more luxurious now, but the table remained in the corner, table 7, where Eric had once sat, cold and distant. Sarah took a seat and ordered a glass of red wine. She didn't know why she'd come or what she was hoping for. Maybe closure. Maybe a ghost. But then, as the soft melody of a piano filled the air, she looked up and her heart stopped. The pianist was him. Eric Dalton stood by the grand piano, dressed simply in a black suit. His hair was slightly longer, and his eyes were the same, deep, dark, and steady. And when his gaze found hers, it was as if a year of silence vanished in a single breath. Sarah. Just her name. But it carried the weight of everything lost and found. She rose, her voice trembling. You're alive." He smiled faintly. "I told you I keep my promises." They sat together, surrounded by people, yet alone in their own world. Eric's hand shook slightly as he poured the wine, the first time she'd ever seen him uncertain. "After the explosion," he said, voice low, "I was severely injured. Marcus got me out and took me overseas until things calmed down. I couldn't reach you. I couldn't risk dragging you or Sophia into danger again." Sarah's eyes glistened. "I thought you were gone." He looked down, his voice softer now. "Maybe the worst part of me did die. The man sitting here now. He's just what's left of the part that still wants to live, to be forgiven." Silence fell. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the city glimmering through the glass. The light touched his face, softening every sharp edge. "And Sophia?" he asked, his voice barely steady. "She's fine," Sarah said gently. "She misses you every day." Eric's hand tightened around the glass. "I don't deserve to hear that." "She said you deserve more than you think," her tone firm, but tender. "Sophia doesn't need a hero, Eric. She needs a father who comes home." The words hung between them, heavy healing. Then he looked at her eyes full of everything he'd never said. "Sarah, I don't want to hide anymore. I want a new life, but only if you still believe in me." Sarah smiled, her tears catching the light. "You once taught me to believe in the impossible. Now it's your turn." They left the restaurant late at night. Los Angeles glowed beneath the streetlights, raindrops sparkling on the pavement like scattered diamonds. Eric slipped off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. He said, "You're still as cold as the first day we met," teasing lightly. "And you're still as stubborn as the man I dragged out of the ocean." He laughed, a quiet, genuine laugh that made her chest ache with peace. "Then save me again, Sarah. But this time, from myself." She met his gaze. "Only if you promise not to disappear again." He stopped, took her hand, and held it tight. Never again. All the fears that once haunted them, the blood, the darkness, the past, dissolved in that moment. There was only light, only the warmth of something they thought they'd lost forever. A week later, Sophia ran barefoot along the sand on the Oregon coast, laughter echoing through the salty wind. From a distance, Sarah watched her hand entwined with Eric's. He wore a white shirt, hair tousled by the breeze. The faintest smile on his lips, the kind that came only after surviving too much. "She still thinks I'm a hero?" he asked, half joking, half unsure. "No," Sarah said softly. "She thinks you're a man who keeps his promises, and I think you're a man who found his way back." He looked at her eyes, calm and full of light. "And he said, you're the one who made me believe light was real." She smiled. "The light was always there, Eric. You just never dared to face it." He said nothing, only leaned in and kissed her forehead, a gentle, lingering kiss that felt like closure and beginning immediately. Sophia ran toward them as the sun set, holding up a seashell shaped like a heart. "Daddy." "Miss Sarah." "Look what I found." Eric took it, smiling softly. "We'll keep it. It's the sign of a new beginning." Sophia grinned and ran off again, leaving them standing side by side under the crimson sky. Sarah tilted her head toward him, whispering, "See the seas still here? And so are we." Eric tightened his grip on her hand. "This time, I won't let any storm take it away." Far beyond them, the sun sank into the ocean, leaving a path of glittering gold stretching to the horizon. The sea breeze carried warmth, the scent of everything they'd lost, and everything they'd finally found again. Because in the end, every story has its dawn, and when the light returns, even the most lost hearts will find their way home. Autumn mornings in Oregon were gentle. The wind swept across the fields of silver grass, carrying the scent of salt from the distant sea and the aroma of hot coffee that filled the little house on the hillside. Sarah stood by the window arranging flowers in a glass vase. Sunlight slanted through the frame, tracing soft lines of gold across her face. Outside, Sophia played with her white kitten, her laughter rising with the breeze. And on the porch, Eric Dalton stood quietly, coffee cup in hand, eyes following the two people he now called family. No more ringing phones, no more guards at the gate. Only peace. A peace he had paid for with every piece of his past. "What are you looking at?" Sarah's voice was soft as the wind moved toward him, and she draped a wool shawl over his shoulders. Eric turned to her, a faint smile touching his lips. "I was thinking, maybe this is what I've been searching for all along." "Peace, no," he said gently, the feeling of being alive. Sarah chuckled. "Still as philosophical as the day I met you." He reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek, eyes warm. "And you're still the one who makes me believe the world isn't entirely dark." She shook her head, half teasing. "Don't idealize me too much, Dalton. I used to be terrified of you." He laughed deeply, quietly and genuinely. "And I used to be more afraid of losing you than of dying." The air stilled for a moment. They looked at each other, no words, just the weight of everything they'd endured. The wind carried the distant sound of waves, a soft symphony waiting to score their ending. By afternoon, the sky turned amber. Sophia came running, waving a small envelope she'd found in the mailbox. "It has Daddy's name on it," she said excitedly. Eric took it, tore it open, and froze. Inside was an official letter from the International Court Notice of cleared charges and case closure. At the bottom, a single line in fine print read, "An anonymous informant has submitted proof that Dalton was framed." Sarah's eyes lifted to his. "Who was it?" Marcus Eric replied softly. "He stayed behind, to make things right." They stood in silence. In that stillness lived sorrow and release, the price of redemption paid in full. That night they sat together on the beach. The fire crackled softly, throwing ribbons of light across the sand. The sea breeze carried salt and calm in equal measure. Sophia slept in Sarah's lap, her small hand curled around a seashell. Across the flames, Eric watched them, his reflection flickering in the firelight, serene and deep as the ocean behind him. "Do you ever wonder," Sarah asked quietly, "if we'd never met at Donatello's? Would things have been different?" He looked at her eyes holding 1,000 memories. "Of course. I'd still be cold, and you'd still be that reckless woman who ran into the storm without thinking twice. But I'd still be alone." She smiled faintly. "Then I don't regret a thing?" He moved closer, sitting beside her. The firelight danced across their faces, and the space between them disappeared. "Sarah," he murmured, voice low, sincere, the kind of tone that could silence the sea. "I used to think love made people weak. But you proved me wrong. Love makes us brave. It brings back to life those who thought they'd already died inside." Her eyes softened. "And I used to think only faith could save a person. But you taught me that sometimes. Forgiveness is the shortest road home." He reached for her hand. "Will you forgive me then?" Sarah met his gaze, no longer cold or shadowed, only a man learning to believe in light again. "I forgave you a long time ago," she whispered. The wind grew gentle. Stars began to appear, scattering like silver dust across the black sky. Sophia stirred in her sleep, her tiny fingers brushing the sand. Eric laid his coat over Sarah's shoulders, then pulled her close. Their kiss wasn't wild or desperate, just a quiet, tender meeting of two souls, finally finding their way home. Under the night sky, the rhythm of the waves blended with their heartbeat, the triumphal song of love after the storm. The next morning, dawn spread across the sea. Sarah walked barefoot along the wet sand, watching the sun rise over the horizon. Behind her came familiar footsteps. Eric approached with an old camera in hand. He lifted it and snapped a photo of her silhouette in the golden light, the ocean glowing behind her, and peace shining through her smile. "Keep it," he said, "so that if we ever forget why we exist, we can look at this." Sarah turned to him, eyes soft. "We won't forget, because real love never disappears." He smiled and took her hand. "Then let's keep walking, Sarah. No past, only tomorrow." Sophia came running across the beach when the sun was high, waving a bright blue kite. "Daddy, Miss Sarah, let's fly it together?" The three of them laughed and ran across the sand. The kite soared higher and higher, painting a curved line across the endless sky. Their laughter carried far over the sea, mingling with the morning light. Sarah looked up, her heart full. She knew now that every wound eventually heals, and every lost soul returns. And no matter how much life changes as long as someone holds your hand tight enough, every storm is worth surviving. In the end, the story of a nurse who once dived into the sea to save a stranger, and a man who lost himself to power, did not end in tears, but in forgiveness. Because some encounters aren't accidents. They're fate's way of teaching us that true love doesn't come to perfect someone. It comes to healing two souls that were never truly loved. If this story touched your heart, comment, or share how you felt. Do you believe love can redeem a person? Subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt romance stories, where every pain has a chance to become